What's up, future shred sexies? Oh, changing it up. Welcome back to Death to the Fingers. Basically, been out of the loop for a week because I come under the weather kind of situation. I put some ice on my shoulder there to just change it up from the heat, and that just made it really, really bad. And I couldn't play for a week. Yeah, story of my life. Of course, I finally get to the level I want to be playing at, and then I get struck down with health problems. Whatever. So essentially, the esprit of the lesson is going to talk about how I practice and what I consider to be a practice session. And then you can sort of, scoop some of these ideas and implement them into your own practice sessions. But the real takeaway here is that in the video, that's just me picking up the guitar, practice for like 5 minutes, whatever, just warming up, and then just put the music on and then just go. That's it. I left all the mistakes in and everything. I just cut it down to 2 minutes now because I don't think you need to hear me do 3 minutes of the exact same thing. And in this case, of course, I'm just sort of working on, brushing off the rust from my alternate picking and all the rest of that. And that's just it. You're not going to be perfect. I think a lot of people get paralyzed by fear. They're like, oh, I might play a wrong note or something. There are no wrong notes. There's sort of like questionable ones. But, you don't actually grow and sort of build confidence as a player if you don't sort of take chances and all the rest of that stuff. So we're going to talk about some of the basic ideas that I worked on there. And then hopefully you can start incorporating them into your own sessions. And again, the overarching sort of idea here is put some crappy AI music on a backing track. Although I find AI now, much to my chagrin, is the sort of like the best way to practice because you can get a full hour in. It's like 20 different little song snippets for like 2 or 3 minutes. They're in different keys. A lot of them are really evil, like F major is not fun and all the rest of that stuff. And it forces you, obviously, you're not going to know what the key is. There's no guitar guy on the other side being like, oh, look, play this backing track in G. So instead, you're forced to basically use your brain and figure it out for yourself and be like, okay, there's the Ionian position. Now I'm playing this. I'm in Phrygian now. Okay, so Phrygian's the third degree of this scale. Trust me, stuff like that will get you way farther in a year than all of this other BS that people sort of promulgate. Do you have to think that much when you're talking to another person trying to convey an idea? Most of us stumble a little bit, but we can get by. That's the same thing with music. It's another form of communication, if you will, although, that's debatable. But my point being here is that you should be comfortable enough with these ideas and sort of moving around the fretboard that it actually sounds credible, right? So the first one I want to talk about, and this one I've been asked a few times, is fragmentation, scale fragmentation. So if we just take sort of E minor here. Right, essentially what I'm going to do is start in the Mixolydian position here. Right, that's 3 notes per string. Right, so what I'm going to do is fragment that little piece of 6 notes, if you will, across Mixolydian into Lydian, into Phrygian, into Dorian, and then finally end sort of like in obviously the Ionian and Locrian position. And the point being here is trust me, a lot of people just play in a linear fashion, just up and down, or doing 3 notes per string diagonally or on one string or whatever it is. And that's all important too. But trust me, there's a magic here that forces your brain to adapt in ways that you didn't probably think about. And just by doing it like this over and over and over again, you're going to get massive results, I promise you, because it breaks down the fretboard in sort of like little micro pieces, which helps you manage that information that much better, right? Remember, speed on the guitar is a product of familiarity. Don't believe any of this other bullshit that it's picking or whatever else. When you're comfortable with these sounds to the point where you listen to it and you're like, that's the Phrygian mode, you'll be able to play fast, I promise you. But if you can't do that, what does it matter if you can play fast? Because most of the time you'll be playing most of the wrong notes. Then it's a problem. Playing an odd sort of like note here and there, okay. Your timing's a little off, fine, no big deal. Don't be paralyzed by fear. People make mistakes. I've watched like a million live videos where some of the best guitar players in the world just absolutely shit the bed. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? They're still great. There's no questioning Eddie Van Halen's greatness, if you will, but I've seen him go off the rails a few times, so whatever. It didn't change my opinion. I've been there too, man. Not quite at that level, but still. Been there, right? So again, starting in Mixolydian here, sliding down, right, into Lydian. Oh yeah, Phrygian, Dorian, and Ionian. Right, so the whole thing together. Now, obviously, that's going to sound way better than just your standard sort of scale stuff. Plus, you get this cascading feel, and that's really what you're looking for. This sort of like one piece reacting to the other. When you just play in a loop, even if you're doing it fast, it sounds pretty cool and stuff like that. But still, over time, it's just going to lose its effectiveness. So breaking it up so you get like this call and answer, despite the fact that you're still playing everything in the same key, is absolutely humongous. And it works for everything. You see me do it again with the pentatonic scale kind of situation where I'm like, right, that's me starting in Ionian, right? First position, Dorian, into Phrygian, and then it would be mixed Lydian, and then Aeolian, right? So right there is another key example of basically, you know, how you can start to use this idea of fragmentation to really help you sort of break out of this scale box. I've been there too, where you just get so focused and all the rest of that stuff that you kind of lose track of the fact that you're just repeating the same sequences over and over and over again. Once you start breaking them into smaller size chunks and moving to the next position, it changes the way you play immediately, right? Plus, all of those sort of miniature skills like the slides, right, become a lot more sort of intuitive. If you've ever watched guitar players like Laurie Basilio and stuff like that, she has amazing sort of ability to really accentuate those slides and take it over the top and be like, that pentatonic run sounded a million times better just because of those little tiny micro slides and stuff like that, as opposed to just going, you know, like this. Right, so I mean, it sounds good and all the rest of that, but when she does it with the little extra slides and some vibrato in there, it takes her from being like a practice exercise like that to actual playing, and that's just the point, is how do you transition from the practice mindset into like a playing mindset when you're using the exact same tools? So if you don't practice these exercises musically, you don't quite get to the music level. You'll technically become proficient, but you won't quite hit that, you know, the top upper range of sort of like musical creativity. I don't know, whatever, you know what I mean? Tone in your fingers, pick whatever stupid sort of like guitar jargon you want to throw in there, but that's a huge one, right? The next one is going to be obviously the idea that you're using sort of like outside notes. I get this a lot, obviously. So you're like, where's that one come from, right? Does anybody know? Harmonic minor, right? And that right there is another big one. You can see me kind of screw up a few times where I sort of didn't quite make the slide, but it actually landed on like a bluesy note. Didn't sound great, but it didn't sound terrible either. And that's just it. When you land on that note and you kind of feel that tension, at first you're like, yikes, and you're like, I screwed up. And then people get like a doe in the headlights. They just stop. Don't. Just be like, whoops, and keep going, right? But the other thing is eventually those notes stop being a mistake and they start being intentional, right? So you're like... Right, so that's just me playing around in the, you know, in the Dorian position there. Right, so the thing here is that you got to start to use those ideas. You're like, there's a lot more sort of like room to play around in the Dorian position. So now you're like, so that's right there. And of course you can keep going. So the thing is like, don't get hung up on basically, oh, you have to know this crazy theory, the flat 3 and the sharp 5 and the flat 6 or whatever it is. Instead, try to be like, these two scales superimpose. Really, in this case, we'll use Dorian because it's 3 or 4 scales if you want. If you're talking about superimposition, Aeolian and Dorian are basically tied at the hip. So I've got this Dorian position, 3 notes per string, right? I've got the pentatonic. I've got the melodic minor or harmonic minor. And of course, Aeolian mode if you want. Right, so those 4 scales basically intersect. It creates whatever, a nexus point. So you can draw notes from any one of those, right? So instead of the major, you've got, right, that little chunk that basically overlaps from the Aeolian position into Mixolydian 3 notes per string, right? Now, the point being here is obviously notice where you're ending 1 here, 1 and 5. Well, of course, those are going to go together, right? They're both major in the major scale context. 1 and 4 does too, right? Right, so now you have those notes to draw from if you want to, but my point being here is you're like, look. And all of a sudden you see this chromaticism start breaking down, and then just through years of practice, you'll know when and where to use those more crazy notes. This is a huge problem with people. They're like, oh, I'll watch this video and all of a sudden I'll be an expert too in using these outside notes. Yeah, no, that doesn't work. You can take it from me. You can watch the video, you can gain understanding about, oh, I can play these 2 scales together, but until you actually start doing it in the context of a backing track and you're like, over that major chord, when I did this move here, it sounded like shiatsu. Instead, you're like, when I did it over the dominant 7, it sounded way better. Now listen, obviously you have to be sort of paying attention enough to be like, oh, that was a dominant 7 chord, right? You're like, what does that sound like? Right, so you got this bluesy idea happening, and then you're like, okay. Right, so kind of diff, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, now I get where you can start sneaking in that one particular note from the harmonic minor mode, essentially to really take your pentatonic and 3 notes per string or diatonic scale information and playing over the top. And usually that's all it takes, right? Now, of course, the last thing I want to talk about, because I don't want this video to get insane, is just combinations of ideas and chromaticism. This is a huge missed opportunity for people. They get absolutely nuts about the chromaticism. They just don't do it, right? They're just like... Instead of like... And you're like... Now, just using the low 3 strings, or low 2 strings, I should say, you can clearly see where I'm starting to do the chromaticism from this Ionian position. Right, and when I get up to the next one, I'm using these 3 from the Dorian position. If I have this whole step configuration for the first 3 strings, obviously. Right, so there's me doing a whole bunch of those extra notes there. Which one's that? The flat 5 or flat 3 or what is it? So I'll leave it up to you to figure out what that is, but most people call it the blues note. There's a little hint kind of situation. This one, flat 2, right? So again, 1, flat 2, and then... Right, that's classic, sort of classic rock. Yes, I use classic twice, 3 times now. I'll shut up. So I think you get the idea here. You're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now listen, you start practicing like that where you're like these 3 and then my pinky and then this first one and these 3 fingers together. Dexterity goes up, hand-eye coordination goes up, which is just basically you being able to, it doesn't actually mean you have to see, it just means you can sync up these muscle sort of groupings and you're like, okay, that's not normal for me. Or this isn't normal for me or whatever, right? Nanu, or live long and prosper, the whole 9 yards. Nanu is from Mork and Mindy. If you weren't around in the 70s, I apologize. You missed out on some good stuff. But you get the idea there. That right there is going to be fundamental in sort of changing how you approach the fretboard and also how you phrase your ideas. You're like, right? So those chromatic ideas are the difference between a really, really cool and skilled sounding guitarist and musician and somebody that's just very competent. There's nothing wrong. I want to make this clear. There's nothing wrong with doing something like if I could play it. Okay, I'll dumb it down. I got a little carried away there. Looks like I need to practice for a little bit more before I make these damn videos. But right, there's nothing wrong with that. You can be like, no. See, I just broke my own damn rule there. Essentially, notice how much cooler it sounds when I start on the flat 5 there, right? There's 6, flat 5. Where does that come from? Yes, harmonic minor. But obviously, if you do that in the middle of a blues song, you got an issue, but those two scales exist in the same place. So if you're like, now all of a sudden you understand the nature of that sharp 5. It can be used as like this little accent note. Now notice the difference. It sort of sounds a lot more fluid. It has a lot more feel or whatever, emotion. And also it just gives you an opportunity with the 3 notes now, comparably. You can get the sort of more fluidity and the speed necessary to impress your girlfriend or your mom or whatever. Right, so it's a question of just throwing them in there. And of course, there's that basic rule with respect to the pentatonic. Those 4 notes there, essentially from the Mixolydian position and the pentatonic scale, effectively only have a whole step. So whenever that's happening, I can basically fill it in with chromaticism. Then I need to bounce back to the major scale stuff. Where does that come from? That came from Lydian. Right, so there it is. You can sort of start with Mixolydian there. Right, so just by tacking on that little chunk at the very bottom with the chromaticism, you get those kinds of ideas, right? So don't skip out on chromaticism. Don't skip out on sort of exploring those more exotic notes and stuff like that. And then later on, when you get good enough, you'll be able to identify. You'll be like, there's the 6th degree of the G major scale. I could have played it here too, right? There's A, there's G. Or with the A type, there's the G type there. So again, caged G happens all over the place. You don't just have to go to the big one there, right? Where's G as the D type, right? Well, you just did that one. You go down here, you're like, it's right there. Right? So again, using caged to help you, and then you're like, oh, okay, if that's true, then oh, okay. Using that nice little juicy arpeggio, dominant 7, in this case, the minor 7 variant. That's the 2nd inversion. That one right there is the 3rd inversion. And of course, you have the root inversion here. Right, so I mean, my point being here is like you can start now using that to your advantage. You're like, there's the note G. Right? There's E, G, A, E, right? So the note names do become important. But more importantly, you're like, okay, there's a G. And the next one in the sequence there is going to be here, right? Which puts me, I got to jump up, right, to make my G. So again, you can start to see where they overlap between the D type and the C type there, right? You can use that, then you're like, there's the root there, there's the A type, there's the G type. And using that now, you can basically start to build everything. If you're like, if that's G, which is the same as, right? So again, I'm just taking this and moving it here. Same sequence of fingers too. A whole step, followed by 2 minor thirds. And again. Now, of course, I got a little bit more psycho there. I apologize. I shouldn't have done that. I can't help it anymore, and I'm old and dumb, so it is what it is. But I hope some of these ideas will help you out. Fragmentation, right? Right? Very, very useful. Of course, gives you that kind of sequenced feel. Absolutely essential. Then trying to factor in, of course, chromaticism, the extra notes. Going to give you that, really, really sought after sort of outside sound. And last but not least, of course, I mentioned it is practicing in the context of effectively music. Do not just, spend some time working with no music. That's going to be important because you should be able to just pick up a guitar and make music. Not play solos, not play riffs, not play licks. Music. Like something serious. You're like, I'm going to play something in the key of G and then do something in the key of G. That doesn't just revolve around you noodling around, you know what I mean? And last but not least, of course, is confidence. How are you going to develop any confidence if you're not actually sort of like willing to make a mistake, even in a live context? That's why I made the recording. Now people will be like, well, it sounded pretty good to me, and it does sound okay. After 40 plus years of music training every single day, right? It didn't just happen one day. So that's why I can kind of make it look a little easier or whatever else, but I still screw up all the time massively and make huge mistakes, right? So, but the thing is that happens way less now. The number of mistakes, the number of times I can't actually play what I'm thinking in my mind happens way less than it did before. Why? Confidence. Just kept pushing through and being like, okay, you screwed up, no big deal. Keep going. I cannot tell you that kind of mindset is essential to hitting the next level. And I didn't say it, but I will say it now. Educate yourself. Don't just be like, oh, look, scale system X. Try to really understand what it is that you're doing. Try to actually sort of be like, if I was going to start in the melodic minor, if I was going to start in the harmonic minor, I would just skip the melodic minor until you're ready for that. But the harmonic minor should be absolutely part of your practice session. And therefore, you should be able to easily play it. You're like, okay, here's A minor. And you're like, here's A minor's harmonic minor variant. Right? Or vice versa, right? There are a lot more, obviously. And then, of course, you can then use that information to your advantage because you're like, well, in the context of the harmonic minor, this one particular note doesn't sound that great. And of course, you're noticing it there. Right? That one particular note and all the rest of that stuff there ends up being a little chromatic. And that's my point is at first you're like, oh, it's just a chromatic note, play whatever. But then all of a sudden you're like, that note there comes from the harmonic minor system. Why is that important? It's a leaping off point. You might want to change direction totally and just be like, I'm going to use that as a pivot point for substitution, for superimposition, to do something else, create an arpeggio, whatever it is. And if you know where you are, then you know what you can do. Right. That's the end of the video. Get practicing. You lazy bastards. See you in the next one.